Israel's war seems to have just stopped. Everything has slowed down a lot. Now, there's a really big reason for this, but first thing I want to say is I've never seen this in military history. You have the Israeli Defense Forces who go into Gaza and they capture and do all of their mission objectives they said they're gonna do, and now all of a sudden, with momentum on their side, you need to stop Israel. Okay, so there are things out there called the Geneva Convention, the international humanitarian laws. You may know them as the rules of war. And Israel needs to follow the rules of war. And so what we are seeing right now is Gaza is quite literally cut in half. You have northern Gaza, which has been isolated. You might even want to call it a siege, where northern Gaza is cut off from southern Gaza. So right now, all of Israeli Defense Force social medias or anything Israel, they are on this campaign to show the world that they are providing humanitarian aid, and they have officially opened up lanes for people to evacuate northern Gaza into southern Gaza. Now, this is quite the change of tone when Israel said, we are not going to stop what we're doing, we are going to enter northern Gaza, and we're going to find Hamas. Everything has changed. This is mainly because the United States made it very clear if you want any support from the US military or anything United States, you need to provide humanitarian aid. Now, this is quite a gray area because to Israel, they're providing humanitarian aid, but they need to get to the south to get it. Now, on the flip side, you have another half of the country where it's very difficult to get humanitarian aid from southern Gaza into northern Gaza. There's a lot of reasons for this, but to Israel, why would they open up anything going into northern Gaza? They just cut everything off. However, it looks like outside forces have prevailed and Israel has stopped, but they have not stopped other operations that could enhance or help their performance into northern Gaza. Now, Israel has found other ways to progress their mission or to advance towards Hamas. Not so much on the surface, but to the tunnel systems we go. Israeli Defense Forces has been releasing footage of K9s going into tunnel systems and other ways of clearing tunnel systems such as bunker busters. And look, if Israel is just going to be halted on the surface, they still have the biggest underlying issue ever, and really no military in the world would be prepared for this. They have to clear all of the tunnel systems throughout Gaza if Israel wants to quote unquote win this war or win all of their objectives. And to Israel, priority number one is destroy all of Hamas and Hamas infrastructure, and tunnel systems are on that list for infrastructure. So the means to destroy these tunnel systems is extremely complex, complicated, and some might say near impossible. The way that Israel has been finding these tunnel systems is if somebody pops up out of them and they're able to trace them running back towards the tunnel system. You literally have Hamas releasing footage that I can't show on here of them just popping up out of nowhere, and right in front of them is a column of tanks and a group of Israeli Defense Forces. And then after their successful attack, they'll just crawl right back into the tunnel systems. But again, this is how Israel is identifying and finding these tunnels. It's a very unfortunate way to locate tunnel systems, but it's kind of the only way they can do it unless they just so happen to stumble upon the tunnels. Now, some of you might be saying, well, what's the issue here? Just take it all out, cover it up with some dirt, and move on. There is a massive issue here because on the mission objectives for the Israeli Defense Forces, you have a thing called hostages. And if these hostages are in the tunnels or somewhere in the tunnel system, Israel can't just go about and destroy the tunnel systems from above with the bunker busters, or just go on in with combat engineers and use demolitions to destroy it. They quite literally need to find a way to clear the tunnel system, and if anybody knows any Vietnam history, there's really only one way to do that. You send a guy down there and you clear it out. So again, although Israeli operations have paused, they really have not stopped all the way. Humanitarian aid is slowly trickling into the north, and there are open lanes for civilians to go from northern Gaza to southern Gaza, but Israel again is on this gruesome task of trying to clear the tunnel systems. Now, one thing I want to touch on is that there are two sieges going on right now within Gaza and outside of Gaza. This right here is extremely crucial, again, for mission objectives, because objective number one, and I'm not saying this comes straight from Israel, is that they want to destroy all of Hamas, but objective number two is secure the border. So why do we have two sieges right now? Well, due to the tunnel systems, they tend to overlap, and Israel knows for sure there are tunnels going in into Israel. In fact, there are even depictions and maps and tunnels that have been uncovered that will go all the way into Egypt, cut over, back into Gaza, back into Egypt, and then right back into Israel. It's very hard to find these tunnels, but Hamas is very sneaky in the way they've designed these tunnels. And so you have 2 sieges right now to isolate northern Gaza, so there's no tunnel traffic going from northern Gaza to southern Gaza. But more important to Israel, so Hamas does not have a way to where when Israel goes into Gaza City, because it looks like they're going to, it's on their mission objectives, if Israel walks right on top of Hamas, Hamas can just walk right over into Israel via a tunnel system. So to minimize these threats, Israel has a dual siege right now into northern Gaza, into the outside of Gaza, and hopefully Israel can try and contain or isolate any sort of tunnel attacks that go into Israel. Now, as far as the mission down in southern Gaza, you're not hearing too much about it, other than independent journalists literally leaking the fact that the US military and other clandestine units are using drones to watch all of southern Gaza in hopes of finding hostages. You quite literally have MQ-9 Reaper drones that are just circling all of southern Gaza to hopefully identify some sort of life or something with hostages, any sort of indications. But the question is, how do you go down and get them? Well, there's some other evidence out there that the US government is heavily involved in this operation. Very recently, it turns out the CIA director is officially in Israel. Now, CIA tends to follow history, and let me explain that. The last time the CIA director was in a country, it was exposed or leaked that the CIA was heavily involved in that military's operation. I'm talking about the country of Ukraine. Back in 2014, of all publication, Forbes publication pointed out the fact that the CIA director at the time is in Ukraine. No one knew why, but there were a lot of indicators that the CIA was starting to train and be embedded with Ukrainian forces in case Russia tries to attack Ukraine. Fast forward to about 2022, 2021-ish, the CIA leaked themselves that, yeah, we were in Ukraine, and guess what? The military you see today, it's because of us. We trained Ukrainians on exactly how to defend their country from a Russian attack. So the reason why I'm making this correlation is because, look, if it happened back in 2014, the CIA tends to be 5 steps ahead of the curve, as I like to say. And if the CIA has been spotted in Israel, of all people, the director of the CIA, we're talking about the top dog here, without a doubt, the CIA is heavily involved or is looking for a way to get involved with these hostages. If you know a thing or two about the CIA, they were the first people in Afghanistan, the clandestine units, these black ops units who embed themselves into territories with rebel groups or amongst themselves, and they provide frontline access and resources and information for the United States. Now look, the drones that were flying around southern Gaza, that was the US military. People are saying it was US military special forces, and the CIA special forces, they work hand in hand. Again, when you look into history, the involvement in the Afghanistan conflict, you had special forces, 5th Group, and you also had CIA working together to try and recapture Afghanistan, which they did in 1 month, by the way. So we have a lot of moving elements and parts. One thing I also want to point out, there seems to be quite a difference in mission objectives for the United States and for Israel. There's like a lot of different storylines and plots going on here. To Israel, there's never really this major tone of, we're gonna get those hostages back. It's always a very pessimistic, we hope to get the hostages back, we think they're still around, but one thing's for sure, we are going to get Hamas. So Israel is really not trying to provide this promise of we're going to get the hostages back. They want to provide the evidence that they're going after Hamas. Whereas the United States is really dealing with their own issues beyond Israel, because right now the United States, whenever they talk about Israel, Gaza, they're talking about hostages. It's never like, oh, let's go take out the bunkers. It's, you know, we're trying to find hostages. We have about 30 plus American hostages in Gaza. We are looking for them. There's a reason why you have drones flying around Gaza, and you have the CIA, you have Delta out there. I know that's not their name, but I'm going to call them Delta. You have a ton of U.S. military assets on this high elite level, which they do hostage rescue. There's a reason why they are operating amongst the capacity of the Israeli Defense Forces. United States, objective number 1, find the hostages. So hopefully the United States and Israel can come together and try to figure out a way to utilize both of their assets to look for the hostages and to complete all mission objectives. Now, some other concerns for the United States beyond the hostages in Israel is the fact that the United States has been attacked around 50 times of making this video between proxy units in Iraq and Syria. Now, you're probably not hearing about this too much because I like to point out the fact that nobody knows who this group is. We just know them as the Islamic Resistance in Iraq. And because of that, you're not hearing too much about them because there's no public profile on them. There's no access to them even on the public database the CIA has. They have public access to all of this information. And the United States does not look like they even want to focus on these proxy units, considering they just sent a Ohio-class nuke sub into the region, which, by the way, the United States never tends to make that public, especially during combat operations. And that would be the wildest move in all of military history, to utilize a nuke sub on a proxy unit. So the reason for the nuke sub and all of these naval assets in the area is to deter governments and big countries. You have the country of Algeria, who made it legal to enter the war in Israel, but let's be honest, that country will most likely do nothing, considering, again, the US military has every single asset they need to deter any country from attacking Israel. And you have other countries whose names I can't say on here that starts with the letter I and ends with An. That country obviously is funding a lot of these proxy units, but again, the proxy units is not the issue for the US military. The issue is that big country and that government. That's why you have an Ohio-class sub. That's why you have 2 aircraft carriers. That's why you have every single naval asset ever to stop that country from entering the conflict themselves. There's been absolutely zero evidence that the US military is providing direct combat access into Gaza. More so just the reconnaissance element and mission planning. There's been no visual evidence, there's been no leaks of US military members, to include CIA, boots on the ground in Gaza. I think it's extremely highly plausible that they are operating in the capacity of they are in Gaza, they are embedded with like a headquarters unit who's not necessarily on the front lines. But in order for the US military to get the best reconnaissance and the best information, it's going to be boots on the ground and access directly to the front lines. Again, I'm not saying that the US military is front lines, but if I had to make a bet or gamble on this, it's without question the US military. The special operations units and CIA is probably boots on the ground, not on the front line, with a headquarters unit. Now, as far as Gaza being split in half, again, Israeli Defense Forces, they are focusing on the humanitarian aid, they are focusing on the tunnel systems. We don't know how Israel is going to enter Gaza City and clear everything out. There's this notion that just because Israel can take out all of northern Gaza, that's all of a sudden mission success. Even theoretically, if Israel takes out every single Hamas unit today and they take out all the infrastructure, you still have hundreds of thousands of civilians in the middle of a humanitarian crisis. Which is why speculation from outside of Israel is this is a never-ending conflict and this is a no-win situation for all sides involved. Because even though Israel is saying they do not want to occupy Gaza, they are currently occupying Gaza. And let's say all of a sudden Israel just leaves Gaza, that leaves like the entire region into rubble. It leaves them into nothing. So it looks like Israel is trying to provide humanitarian aid according to Israeli Defense Force websites and social medias. But other than that, it does look like the United States is starting to put a little more pressure on Israel of you need to stop. Not necessarily ceasefire, but for sure start to open up lanes, start to allow humanitarian aid to go into the country. Even if Hamas takes some of the humanitarian aid, you did what you have to do according to the Geneva Convention, according to the rules of war, if you will. And Israel has to do it if they want support from other Western elements, to include the United States.